Hello? Can you hear us? There we go. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Mary Colgate from Brady Ware. I have the honor of introducing our lunch speaker. As a Brady Ware team member, I have had the pleasure of working with Paul, and cannot say the nicest things about him. We were sponsors of the event on Friday night, and the performance was wonderful. So if you have not been to a performance of the Dayton Art Alliance, I recommend that you participate. Paul is the CEO and president of the nation's first combined ballet, opera, and symphony orchestra. And as I had said, he's from the Dayton Performing Arts Alliance. He's got 31 years of experience in the arts. He has also been in leadership roles with the Dayton Philharmonic Orchestra, the West Virginia Symphony Orchestra, the Erie Philharmonic, and the Kalamazoo Symphony Orchestra. So please welcome Paul to tell his success story at the Dayton Performing Arts Alliance.
Thank you very much. I am on a mic. Can everyone hear me? I'm usually pretty good at just blasting it out no matter what. So I'm here today, as you see, to tell you how we did it and how we're doing. The first thing, though, I want to make it very clear. It was very flattering to hear Jennifer earlier this morning talk about us as a success story, and Mary to mention that again. I want to stress that we are very much in the same situation as all nonprofits, and that's, I think, one of the challenges we face is this, you did this great thing, so now you guys have fixed it for all time. That's not the case. We are raising money like crazy, as my colleague Amber Rose can attest. That's what successful organizations do. They never ever stop, and no matter what great strategic move you make, the idea is that's going to position you for better and more fundraising, not that it's somehow going to cause that need to go away. So anyway, and that's very much where we are. But I want to spend some time on the process of how 5 years ago we were able to get these three similar but very different organizations together. So the background is the three partners that make up the Alliance are the Dayton Opera, the Dayton Ballet, and the Dayton Philharmonic. And collectively, there's over 200 years of history there. The Philharmonic's now 85 years old. Ballet is celebrating its Ruby Jubilee 80th anniversary. Opera's, I think, 54 now. As you heard earlier, it was really economic factors that brought us to the table in the aftermath of 2008, 2009. The initial conversations were on costs. All the organizations were concerned about the dreaded word sustainability. One of the things I really, really like that we heard earlier today is that, you hear that thrown around all the time, but I started writing down when she said, or whoever said it, was that the real key is resiliency. Because sustainability means just somehow managing to hang on to what you have at the time, and that may not be where you want to be or can be in the future. But we were looking for a game changer, and at first it was like, well, how can we sustain ourselves as we are now? And the first thing we kind of had to work through was, well, does this make sense? Are we the people who should be here? Should somebody else be here? Should somebody not be here? What we identified, first of all, was that we are producers, not presenters. And in the performing arts, what that means is we put together resident companies of dancers, singers, and musicians, and we produce our performances using those companies rather than identifying touring troupes that work around the country. That's kind of the Broadway presenting model. There's a tour of Cats going out on the road. It's going to be in Des Moines one week, and then it's going to be in Springfield, and it could be in Dayton. Our model is that we have an orchestra that works together to present a different concert every weekend practically. We have a ballet company that works together to put together 5 or 6 major performances a year. The benefit of that is you have artists that are resident in the community. They can do other things as well. They're part of the community. They teach the music lessons. They can teach in the ballet school. They can be part of community events. A lot of pluses there. So we all kind of had that model. We also had orchestral music as kind of a common element. The orchestra was already part of Dayton Opera's presentations, and there was clearly a desire, could cost obstacles be overcome, to have the orchestra be part of at least some of the ballet's presentations. We did have a good record of past collaboration, and I think that was an especially important point. If these were, organizations that really didn't know each other and had kind of been, brought together on kind of a blind date type of format, we may not have had the same success. And then another comment that I kind of heard earlier is we did have a lot of supporters and donors in common. So on the one hand, you go in feeling pretty good. Well, we got some of the big institutional funders. They support all 3 of us. But then there was also that uneasiness about, we have some individual donors, and, if we show them ours, they were going to show them theirs, and it was a little bit of trepidation about that. But, one step at a time. So one of the things that we really did start to sense right from the beginning is that while there were some opportunities maybe to tap some revenue that otherwise would have been in the table, and some opportunities for some savings perhaps, the conversation quickly turned to greater opportunities. Greater opportunities to really expand our base and to do things that we weren't doing now and that would position ourselves for better success in the future. So our process was first to take a look at a whole range of options for partnership. There's all kinds of ways that nonprofits can work together beyond actually merging to form a single 501c3. So we talked through all of them, a shared service, all those kinds of things. And our facilitator, who is Dave Ramey, many of you may know him and have worked with him, led us through exercises that let us take a look at our core competencies. What are we really good at? What are our weaknesses? What's our competitive position? What are our structures? What are the cultures like? And again, the funding source. After working through that, we kind of looked at some of the different ways we could work together. We came up with a number of touch points that we wanted to work through as we continued to develop recommendations for our boards. So basically, in this first phase, we put together a group that had leadership from both the artistic, executive, and board sides of all 3 organizations. And we charged that group with the responsibility to pursue a specific merger plan, and all 3 boards voted to endorse that process. So then we set out to make up an actual business plan for the potential new organization. And that's where we started mapping out a new vision, goals for the organization, and performance measures that would let us evaluate how the new organization, whether it was succeeding or not. The business case then turned to development of a staffing plan, a governance structure, how we would put our season together, planning together rather than separately, and of course a 5-year financial forecast. One of the things that I think was very important to our process was we wanted to be as open about it as possible. Nonprofit arts organizations are big and complicated, and that's true when there's one. You can imagine when you get 3 in the same room. You've got a board, you've got staff, you've got volunteers, you've got funders of all sorts and types. You've got patrons ranging from the casual fan to the person who's had the same seat for 35 years. So we wanted to have a process that was as inclusive as possible and that was based on kind of open sharing of information rather than hoarding of information. So we held a number of stakeholder forums I should mention that all three organizations prior to the merger were membership organizations. You know, membership organization, you have to have an annual meeting of the membership, and that's how the board's elected. So we had members as well as board members, we had donors, staff, and we had institutional funders, grant-making organizations. We did a kind of Q&A and presentation session for all those constituents in the early phases of this. As we worked on this, we were able to engage with some funders who, you know, were taking an interest in what we were doing. The Dayton Foundation was an absolute champion of this right from the beginning. They helped make it possible for us to work with Mr. Ramey. We continue to keep our executive teams, our boards informed, and we then basically took the whole calendar year of 2011 to put together a plan. We began thinking ahead to, well, if we go ahead with this, we're going to need to have communications. That should not come from any one of the organizations while we're still separate. So we established a relationship with a public relations professional to help guide the public face of the new model. And we, of course, got into the discussions of name, and as you can imagine, that took a while to get sorted out. The final vote by the boards of trustees took place in February and March of 2012, but that still wasn't it, because, you know, only at that point do you really dig into the legal due diligence, where you really start going through everybody's records, financial and otherwise, to, you know, make sure that there aren't any surprises hidden in there that board members might very well want to know about. And then, of course, the selection of the new board, which was a challenge in that we, among the three organizations, we had 107 board members prior to the merger, and we wanted to end up with 36, which was, you know, still seen as a large board. Just a little sidebar there, we do operate with a large board for advocacy purposes. That's, and you know, I could do a whole separate talk about the challenges of an advocacy board versus a you know, a purely governing board, because, you know, obviously boards do have to do both in any organization, but we use the numbers for advocacy purposes. But anyway, still, even with a large board of 36, going down to 107 becomes trickier. And of course, we have subsequently expanded the board somewhat, but at the time of the merger it was 36, 3 classes of 12. Okay, so the merger was effective July 1st, 2012. So, you know, many of you have been in the area, have heard this before, heard some steps. I want to talk now about what we've done since then and what we're focused on now. Here are some of the things that I'm proud of that we've been able to do since 2012. First of all, we're serving over 95,000 people a year with our public entertainment, cultural, and educational performances. In addition to those, we serve 75,000 children from 12 Ohio counties with educational programming. We have forged, I believe, a new institutional culture that embraces all three art forms, and that did not happen overnight. That involved a lot of getting to know how each organization has functioned in the past, what some of the key touch points were, what some of the hot button issues were, and coming up with something that was not an imposition of one culture on the others, but rather forging a new and common culture, adopting practices from one or the other as it made sense to do so. We've put on a whole wide variety of things. We like to say everything from Bach to rock, concerts with artists from the classics to Kenny G, some cutting edge presentations, some cutting edge in that they used new technology, like an opera we did that had digital projected sets, some cutting edge in the social issues that they engage with, like the opera Dead Man Walking. We were one of 5 organizations nationally to receive a grant from New Music USA and the League of American Orchestras a couple years ago to commission a new opera, which we were able to premiere in 2016. So we have just recently taken stock of where the organization is after the first 5 years, and said, where do we want to go over the next 5 years? What's that going to look like? Is it time to kind of take stock of those initial goals, some of which we feel we achieved, others where we're still working, and put together a new statement to the community about where the Alliance is going. So this is what we've come up with. Our vision is to transform lives through the power of music and dance. And you can imagine there was tremendous, debate about this. Is that something we can really do? And I will tell you, I'm someone who embraces a certain amount of ambiguity, and I'm someone who embraces a certain amount of contradiction. And as we work through these, we'll touch on that. And I will tell you, I'm not saying that everybody who, goes to see, our Holiday Pops concert is going to come out and say, I'm a changed woman, everything is different now, But we do firmly believe that at some level, the kinds of experiences we offer, whether it's a child having the first opportunity to see a ballet dancer up close, or hear an orchestra in the Schuster Center, or someone coming to a performance of a symphony that maybe just, based on where they are in their life, just speaks to them in a certain way. It really does change the way people view themselves and view other people and the way they interact with the world. That's what the arts are all about. So we said, even though sometimes people will say, come on, do you really do that? We do think, yes, overall, that's what we're about. Our purpose, I got to go back. I always like to say this shot of two of our dancers, this is not a Photoshop shot. That really was on the riverfront, and the photographer just caught them at the perfect moment. The shadows are real. I do have some nice pictures to share with you. So our purpose is to be the indispensable source in the community for traditional, diverse, and innovative experiences in ballet, opera, and orchestral music. That's a shot from one of our season opening spectaculars. As a matter of fact, the very first one that we ever did with our chorus and orchestra, the ballet company, and opera singers on stage all at the same time. So values. Now here's where we said we need a couple statements about what you can expect from us, or what we're going to aspire to be, what we're going to aspire to represent as we go about our work. And first we said we have to be a welcoming force. We have to address and enhance the lives of all people. The arts sometimes have this reputation of being elite, of being for people in certain zip codes. And again, not speaking of Dayton, but speaking in general, there's good reasons for that. I mean, the reason that the Metropolitan Opera was first built in New York City was so a certain group could have an opera house so they wouldn't have to go to the opera with the other group of people. So that, going back to the 19th century and the early 20th century, there's a certain amount of truth to that. And so we do have to work to overcome it, and we wanted to go ahead and state right away that we have to address the entire community. Now again, are we doing it now? Not as well as we could, but it gives us something to work towards. It's not just a pat on our back. We do all these things. This is where we want to go, what we want to be. We want to be fearless innovators. We want to explore new horizons in music and dance and not be content with just doing the same things that have proven successful in the past. I had mentioned the new opera that we commissioned. That's a shot from there with some of that digitally generated scenery and Dayton Ballet in the foreground. We have to be responsible stewards. We're here at the behest of Brady Ware, so this is the one the accountants will say, yeah, I like this one a lot. But it's important because, again, the reason we have a shot of a child here is that's what's at stake. That's what's at stake when we say we have to be sure that the decisions we make ensure not only a great couple shows over the next year, but that the institution is preserved and that these art forms continue to be available to our children and our grandchildren. We have to be uncompromising performers. We do strive for the very highest levels of quality in everything we do. Now here's the thing where, again, you have to embrace some of the contradiction and some of the push-pull, because I can tell you, if there's one word that describes arts management, it's all about compromise. I mean, you know, we often say if money was no object. Well, money's always an object, you know, it's always an object. So we always have to say, you know, no, Neil, you can't have 7 rehearsals for that program. You know, we just have to make it work on 4, you know, that kind of thing. Not that he's asked for 6, maybe not 7. But there are other things where we'll say, you know, there's just that constant push-pull of what we want to do versus what we have the resources to do. And so we do have to make compromises in execution from time to time. We hope that we do that in a way that's not visible. However, that's part of the game, but we still aspire to the very highest level. That's where we start. We start by saying, if we're going to do this particular work, we want to do it the very best way we can possibly imagine it being done. Education, a key part of our mission. Our job is to stimulate the imagination and open minds to new possibilities. So that's important to us. And we want to be a partner. We don't want to just kind of, you know, be up in our suite of offices making all the decisions. We want to work with other organizations in the cultural, educational, and business sectors. And finally, we know that getting this done in an increasingly competitive environment, in one with many economic challenges, shifting priorities for many funders, is going to take a very determined commitment and advocacy at the staff level, at the volunteer level, at the governance level, the board level is going to be critical to our success. So some of our new goals. First of all, the big one, we say our aspirational goal, because at the end of the day, we want to matter to Dayton. We want the arts to be seen as an absolutely key feature of this community. And that means attracting diverse audiences, serving the community, and increasing awareness of all the things that we do. Not just the high-profile things, but some of those classroom things that maybe don't get quite the same amount of exposure. In service to the community, we want to offer some new performances, find those new partnerships, be more accessible, and excite and engage our volunteers. Our unique artistic structure. We are the only fully merged company of this type in the United States, as was touched on earlier. So we want to exemplify a commitment to our artists, champion new work and technologies, develop integrated arts experiences, and honor that legacy. Again, 200 years of history. We don't want to walk away from that. We want to continue to celebrate that and make it clear that, you know, this didn't start in 2012. I mean, a certain new legal entity and a new strategic approach did, but all the rest of it going back to the 1930s to 1912, that's all still part of it as well. Education for all ages is a goal. We want to be a leader in community education initiatives. We want to integrate the 3 art forms together, not just offer siloed presentations, which is absolutely where we were in 2012 and in many ways where we still are. But we're making progress on that, on really bringing the 3 art forms together in educational activity, and again, be a tireless champion for the benefits of arts education. Fiscal sustainability, we call this the foundational goal. You know, you have to have aspirations, you have to have a place you want to be, but you also have to have a strong foundation that you can stand on while you reach for the stars, and that's where the fiscal sustainability comes in. We know that we are going to need to keep raising money. The most successful organizations raise money, they raise money some more. You know, again, I talked about one of the things that's a challenge is sometimes people think, well, you did this merger, so, you know, that you got it all licked now, and that's not the case at all. But I always just think of, you know, what's the best endowed college in the country? I think it's Harvard. It's probably one of the Ivies. But do you think they've stopped fundraising at Harvard? I doubt it. The best endowed arts organization in the country is the Metropolitan Opera. And if you come from El Paso, Texas, and go to the Metropolitan Opera, they will reach out to you to fundraise. You just have to keep doing that in order to, not just to preserve where you are, but to be what you want to be down the road. You have to keep raising the money. And we have to balance our operating budget while we do it. It's just not a case of, well, if all these things happen, then, maybe we'll balance our budget then. The thing we have to challenge ourselves to do is to balance it right in the here and now. And that is a big challenge, believe me. And of course, building operating cash reserves is a key part of that as well. All right, so now having kind of taken you through where things stand now, how we made it work, how we've made it work over the past 5 years as well as in the merger process is, first of all, that our artistic leaders are aligned. There was that good track record of collaboration. Tom Bankston for the opera, Neil Gittleman for the Philharmonic, Karen Ussenberg for the ballet were prior collaborators prior to the merger, and that was very important as we continued to work through it. You know, we use several metaphors. They check their egos at the door, they share their toys, and all that sort of thing. But you know, it gets at an essential truth that this wasn't about protecting turf. It was about how can we best work together. Board members will respond to that. If board members see the leadership being willing to have those conversations, then they'll do it. But they'll also mirror the other behavior. So if you were going through a process like this, and there was that kind of protective and, you know, set this part over here and so no one else can touch it kind of attitude, that would become contagious. One of the things that I always mentioned was an advantage to us was that all three organizations had gone through a certain amount of cutting back, both programmatic and staffing as well. So we didn't have as many situations as you might think where you had, you know, 3 people with the same job and you had to sort it down to 1 or maybe 2 at the most. There were a lot of vacancies, so that the merger in many respects was an opportunity to build capacity back up rather than to cut it back. So that was an opportunity. The flip side of that is we constantly deal with that perception, well, you must have saved so much money when you merged, that, and actually not the case. As I touched on earlier, we did make a very intentional effort to keep everyone who has a piece of these organizations informed. We did not want it to seem like there's some kind of secret thing going on that nobody knows about, nobody wants to talk about. We wanted to be very open that these discussions were going on and that they were not foreordained. You know, we said we're talking about it, we'll keep you informed, we'll let you know how it comes out. We had an active and engaged partner in the Dayton Foundation, and I also think another thing was that each organization went into this. I guess this kind of goes back a lot to the first part and the character, the people we had in our artistic leadership, but we had good self-awareness. There weren't illusions about, you know, what the pluses and minuses were. Each organization knew what it was good at, but was also willing, at least in a closed-door situation, to admit what it wasn't good at and what its challenges were. So some of the lessons that I would say that we learned is, the first of all, is that it's okay to start merger discussions with finances as a factor. I mean, that's a practical consideration. It's one that can't be ignored. But there probably shouldn't be the only factor because you know, it was not too far into this, like by the third meeting, literally, where we started to get a sense of that additional opportunity that might arise through this. And that kept us at the table through some difficult times. Again, in our case, the savings will not be that great, and I think in many nonprofit situations, the savings will not be that great because nonprofits tend to operate at the finest, thinnest margin possible to begin with. As was mentioned earlier, we did have this mindset, and this is challenging to maintain. Consider the 5-year outlook. Think beyond the status quo because it's unlikely to remain that way. And I get asked the question all the time, you know, and usually it's like, okay, now, off the record, Paul, if you had to do it all again, would you still suggest a merger? And I would say, yeah, I would. Not that my life is easy, you know, not that it solved everything, but if I realistically think about where each organization was, I say, you know, chances are it's very possible that at least one of them wouldn't be around or would be significantly different in a bad way than it is right now. And I think even for all the challenges we face, we are stronger facing them together than we would be separately. So again, that's why I don't, you know, hesitate when people ask. I say yes. Now let me tell you a little bit of why I'm saying that. But that's the answer, absolutely. I would say be prepared to take some time. We got it done in about 2 years, and that was probably what you'd have to consider a fast track. I think it's important to work with an experienced facilitator. We were lucky that we were basically a simpatico group at the table, but no matter how simpatico you are, you're going to hit those moments, and you're going to hit the moments when you kind of veer off from the 30,000-foot view and get down into the weeds. And that's where having someone at the table who's a third party and who's kind of been through this before can help keep you where you want to be. You know, the great thing about the Dayton Foundation is that they did help fund the process. That was very important. But also they weren't trying to force the outcome. I never had a conversation with Mike Parks where I felt like he was basically telling me, well, I'll invest in this because I know how it's going to come out. I mean, he was willing to let us work through it, to take the time we needed to step in when help was needed, but he knew as well, and everyone at the Dayton Foundation did, that this might have gone off the rails at any point. So we're very, very grateful for that. Be open about the process, I mentioned, to avoid that whole secret dealings kind of thing. And work toward an outcome that will be better. Don't expect a panacea. It will not be a fix. There will be a lot of initial excitement and so forth, and you can build on that. And I like to think that we did and took advantage of it as much as possible. But there will always be a lot of hard work involved in running a nonprofit, and that will still be there, but it will give you tools, it will give you a perspective, and it will give you a new approach that might very well make a big difference. And I'd say that's where we are. So with that, I'd be happy to field any questions that anyone has. Anyone? Oh, go ahead. Yeah, hi, Rita.
Hi, Paul. How are you? I'd like to know what the reaction of your staff, your working staff, was when you first started talking about this particular opportunity.
I would say overall it was a bit wary. It depended on the situation, and so we were careful to, again, fairly early on have those opportunities for staff to ask questions, both within each organizations and in more of the group forums. That's human nature. All of us can usually simultaneously with any development come up think, well, what does this mean for my organization? But then there's always that little part that's going, well, what does this mean for me? And that's true of all of us, that's true of our staff as well. So what I tried to do in this, as someone who was in a leadership capacity, was always try, if I was in their shoes, what would I want to know? What would I be thinking of? And try to address those concerns as openly and as honestly as I could. But yeah, there was a certain amount of trepidation, definitely. Yeah?
Was there any, it sounds like everybody, the three agencies were on board.
Mm-hmm.
Was there any trepidation? Did anybody have to be convinced, or was it, yes, let's do this?
Well, I would say there was definitely some trepidation, and of course there were the merger discussions where everybody was in the same room. There were the forums where we were presenting jointly, but then right up until July 1st, 2012, each organization did have its own board, and there were some I'd say fairly heated discussions there. I think what usually happens is maybe the reason that all the votes are unanimous is because a lot of nonprofits just simply will not call the question while there's still a lot of discussion going on. And I think there were definitely some situations where if somebody had said, well, we're going to vote right now, it might have been a very different outcome. But there certainly, I can speak from being involved not just at the group level, but then individually with the Philharmonic. There were many sessions where it was like, okay, well, let's explore that some more. Let's ask that question. Let's bring that up. Let's see if we can take that concern and see what kind of answer we get from the overall group. So, yeah, there was certainly you know, I'd say many people saw some possibilities but had some concerns. Then there were other people who had some concerns and you had to kind of sell them on the possibilities. So we had to work with whatever side of the spectrum you were on. We had to kind of work to bring everyone along. Yes?
On the merging part, you said each one had their own different funding sources.
Yes, some different, some in common.
On the merger, what happened to that particular element?
Oh yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. Well, part of the focus groups or forums that we did was to survey folks about, you know, now that you've heard this, let's say you're an existing donor, what's your position going to be with regard to the merged organization? And the response we got was it was a bell curve, basically. There were some who said, I'm going to give less. Oh, we didn't let you do that. Then there were some who were going to say, well, I'll give more. I mean, this is exciting. I'll give more. Yeah, that's great. Most people right in the middle said, we'll keep doing what we've been doing. So, you know, if I'm an individual and I've been given $500 a year to each of the three, well, put me down for $1,500. There was the person who said, no, I'll do two. The person who said, no, I think $750 altogether sounds better to me. But most people were saying, well, we're going to keep doing what we've been doing, and that's what we saw. Now, interestingly, one of the strategies we employed was, you know, it was one organization, but we do allow people to designate their gifts. You know, the thing about the arts is, you know, most of the things you're going to do are going to lose money, so you're going to need support no matter what. So it really was not a big deal for us to say, if you want, your annual gift can be designated to the opera, your annual gift can be designated to the ballet, because we're going to have a need collectively and individually, however you slice it up, we're going to need that funding support. So early on, a lot of people said, yeah, I think I'm more comfortable with that because I've been giving to the Philharmonic, so it just feels better to me to put, you know, Dayton Philharmonic in the memo line. Our hope was that over time, as people saw that this wasn't just a hostile takeover, that, you know, one wasn't suddenly thriving at the expense of the others, that we had basically maintained a commitment to all three, that people would be more comfortable putting just nothing in the memo line, or, you know, 2017 donation in the memo line, and that is in fact what we're seeing. Less than half of the gifts, I'd say actually early on, probably about a quarter of the gifts were just general alliance gifts, the rest were designated, and now well over half are general gifts to the alliance. So we feel like we've built up some level of confidence. At the same time, you know, this is something we talk about a lot, that the longer someone was involved with one of the predecessor organizations, and perhaps, you know, you can put this on a matrix, the greater the level of their support, the more likely they are to still want to identify with the legacy organization rather than the whole. But new givers, you know, new givers are coming to know it as an alliance, as a merged organization that has the three art forms. And so overall, I would say the trend is that people are more comfortable with it as a new organization. We were very careful early on, though, not to kind of throw out the old brands and the old identities, because we knew those were going to be very important to people, both ticket buyers and contributors. Yeah?
So speaking to that, when you were working with your public relations person,
Yeah.
how did you start to combine the branding, or was it a completely new brand?
Well, we used this brilliant strategy early on, and then I will say we did not pay someone $1 million to come up with this. We just took the three existing logos, we put them under a line that said Dayton Performing Arts Alliance on the top. But then as we went on, I mean, you know, because we knew people are going to say, well, you know, the Dayton Ballet logo is red, and it's going to, where'd it go? You know, so it's right there. It's right there. It's part of something new, but it's still there. So over time, you know, you can imagine, you know, it's usually the marketing departments and the creative people, you know, oh, those typefaces are different. Like, oh, you know. So over time we said, okay, you know, we've got this thing off the ground now. We've, you know, started to get some traction. You know, now let's look at something that still has each individual name, but in a more common, you know, design, from a design standpoint, has a more harmonious look. So that's where we are now. And it is important to us to continue to have an individual logo for each art form, because there's certain parts of our business that are very specific. You know, if you're a violist and you're auditioning for a position, you know, you're going to get a schedule that says Dayton Philharmonic on it. Use that logo. If you're an artist arriving to rehearse for 3 weeks for our production of The Barber of Seville, you know, you're going to get schedules that say Dayton Opera on them. So we continue to use the 3 individual ones, but there's always, you know, Dayton Performing Arts Alliance on there somewhere, and then true institutional business is always done under the, you know, the main masthead that speaks first and foremost to the Alliance.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hello. Tell me a little bit about the board transition. As you went them down, did you use existing board members of all 3 became the new, or did you actually bring in some recruit new board members?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The way we managed that transition from the 107 to the 36 was we put together in this case we did just call it a nominating committee, because a lot of the governance at that point were being tackled by an overall merger steering committee. But we put together a nominating task group that had 6 people, 2 from each of the 3 predecessor organizations. One of the things they settled on early on, which I thought was really interesting, and I'm glad that they did, was they didn't say, well, we're just going to, you know, start with the idea that we're each going to get a third of the new board. They said, there are some new people that we need to bring on that, you know, maybe have not been involved in the past but need to be, or that were part of one of the boards a long time ago and then they left, and now this would be a great opportunity to bring them back in. So what we finally wound up with was an initial board that was not divided into thirds, but it was more or less in quarters, with the first 3 quarters coming from one of the predecessors and the other quarter being people who hadn't been on any of the boards prior to the merger, but that had a strong interest in the arts and in the success of the new organization. Other questions? Yeah.
What about your audiences? I think you have a different audience for the opera than the ballet, than the Philharmonic, with a little bit of overlap. How has that really changed with the Alliance?
Well, one of the things that the Alliance lets us do is it allows us, because we're, you know, selling different types of subscriptions, but it's ultimately all ticketing, you know, revenue for us, is you can now exchange freely across all 3 platforms, which I think is particularly beneficial to folks who had primarily, prior to the merger, been with the opera or ballet, because, you know, they have 4 major productions a year, so if something comes up, you can't go to the 3rd one, there's really only 1 remaining option, and you probably already have tickets to that, so, you know, you're going to be, well, I can, you know, see if anybody else wants to come and use my tickets. Now you can exchange those for something on the series of any of the other art forms. So I think it has offered a greater deal of convenience, certainly. On the other hand, because we do offer flexible options, I think people now have seen, well, you know, whereas before, if I wanted to go to the opera and the Philharmonic, I really needed 2 separate season tickets. Now I could get a flexible pass and go to just use that for both. So I can take my 2 subscriptions down to 1. So there's that there too. So some people say, aha, you've just identified a reason not to do something like this. But you know, the thing of it is we know all around the country buying habits for arts tickets are changing. And much as we all love the subscription model, because, you know, people are paying ahead of time, you know, months before the season even starts, and they're committing to the whole thing. I mean, who wouldn't like that business model? It's a great model. But the thing of it is, lifestyles are changing, people's perception of how busy they are, the reality of how busy they are, the multitasking, the additional options, it all comes into play, and fewer people every year, you know, it's not a tidal wave, but it's there, and it's kind of inexorable, are saying, you know, I'd really prefer to just make my decision the week of the show, or I just give me something that I can see how things shape up and go to the things that fit my schedule. And ultimately, I think we couldn't have stopped that. I think it just would have taken another form. You know, it's kind of like we do the same thing well, it looks like the budget isn't going to balance. How about we raise ticket prices? Well, the thing about that is you raise them a certain amount, they just won't come, and that doesn't help. The other thing is, we all offer different levels of seating, so there's a certain point where somebody will say, those seats about 3 rows back, it actually look pretty good. Maybe I'll pay the C price rather than the B price. So people will find ways to optimize you. You have to understand that, work with it, and try to understand at the end of the day, if you're not meeting the needs of your patrons, you're probably not going to be around. I think I'm about to get the high sign here. All right.